Good afternoon. It's Wednesday at noon. This is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our weekly Lunch and Learn class. Hope that everybody's doing well and staying safe, staying inside, staying at home, and staying safe wherever you might find yourself. And if you need companionship, come online. There's lots of us waiting online to chat and to share life together. We've been learning together, and I think learning is one of the best things you can do to share this time. It's what the Jewish people have done to pass time for the last 2,000 years, waiting for the Messiah to come. And there's certainly a lot to learning and plenty of time to wait for the Messiah to come. So, welcome. We're learning Bible. We're learning the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. So you'll need a Bible. You can find them all over the place, of course. Check into any hotel, pull out the first drawer. But the best one is the Jewish Publication Society translation of the Hebrew Bible. It's a good translation. It's scholarly and generally pretty literary and generally pretty accurate. And we'll be using that one today. We've been looking at the Hebrew prophets, the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. The Bible, of course, has three sections. The first section is Torah. The first 5 books of Moses tell the story of the creation of the world, the creation of the Jewish people through our exodus from Egypt and the wandering of the desert. The next 8 books tell the story of the career of Israel in its land, from the conquest of the land by Joshua through the period of the judges, a period of political anarchy, through the rise of the kingship under Saul and then David and then Solomon, the split of the kingship into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. That's in the book of 2 Kings. And finally, the destruction of both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The first 4 books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, tell the story from the point of view of a news story. It's a historical chronicle drawn largely from court documents. It has a point of view, a very strong point of view, a very strong editorial position, but it's more or less a telling of the story in that way. The next 4 books of the Hebrew Bible are a collection of writings and speeches of an extraordinary group of people whom we call the classical prophets. There are 4 books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then an anthology of 12 minor prophets. And these books of prophets fit into the historical period of the book of 2 Kings, and they tell the story they tell actually the point of view, the perspective of an extraordinary group of people whom we call the prophets. Now, the prophets were people who were, we'll talk about this in a moment, inspired, filled with the word of God, and who perceived the foibles and brokenness of the societies that they lived in, the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom. In the last couple of weeks, we took a look at the book of Amos, which is the second book in that anthology of minor prophets. And I pointed out to you what I thought were the major social conditions that gave rise to classical prophecy, the rise of empire and the political, the position of Israel on the political periphery, the growing cultural pluralism among which the Israelites, the ancient Israelites, lived, and the social urbanization that gave rise to all of the moral problems that we associate with big cities, with poverty, income inequality, prostitution, crime, corruption, and the like. And those are the social conditions. And then last week, I mentioned to you that in addition to those social conditions, there were 2 very important religious controversies that gave rise to classical prophecy. First was the conviction of the ancient Israelites that they were somehow protected from history, that nothing bad can happen to us, that the covenant of Israel is an absolute covenant, and as an absolute covenant, it comes with no conditions, and therefore nothing bad can happen. We can act with impunity. And the prophets came along and said, no, you have it exactly the opposite. The covenant isn't a promise of exceptionalism. You're not lifted up out of history somehow and protected from the events of the world around you. On the contrary, you are more responsible for your behavior. You are more responsible for your conduct. You are more responsible for the lives that you live in the eyes of God, and you are more subject to God's judgment. And that was an important fact, important argument, rather, an important controversy within ancient Israel. The other great fact was this question of pluralism. Jews have always lived among other peoples, even when we lived in our own land. Even today, when we live in our own land, we live among other peoples. And we have always been extraordinarily talented at drawing from the cultures in which we live. Abraham was a Mesopotamian. Moses was an Egyptian, and you'll find elements of Mesopotamian and Egyptian culture in the Torah, in ancient Jewish life. Sometimes we copied from them, and often we modified, or sometimes we outright rejected what we got from those ancient cultures, but it was always a cultural conversation. The Talmud carries on a cultural conversation, first with Roman civilization and then with Persian Sasanian civilization. The ancient, the medieval Jewish life was always in a cultural conversation with Islam and with Christianity, and with the philosophical and ideological trends of the world in which we live. And today, we're in a cultural conversation. If you listen to Israeli music, which is ours after all, it's in Hebrew, but it sounds suspiciously like American hip hop music or European sort of cabaret music. And the melodies we use, the literary modes that we use, the ideas that we are working on and working with, all come from the world in which we live. Well, ancient Israelites did the same thing, and what that meant was that they drew in the religious lives of the people among whom they lived, and that gave rise to a sort of hybrid religious life that was partially faithful to the God of Israel, but never as purely faithful as the prophets demanded, and that gave rise to this to the phenomenon of classical prophecy. Well, that's a summary of where we've come so far, a reprise of previous episodes. Today, before beginning on the next prophet, we're going to be looking at the prophet Hosea today. But before we begin on the next prophet, we've talked about what we know. Let's talk about what we don't know, because in fact, what we don't know is a lot more than what we know. I used to have an exercise with high school classes I would teach. And I'd ask him this question. Suppose 10,000 years from now, an archaeologist digs up a copy of Star Wars, the movie, and somehow can play it, some kind of device. What mistakes might they make? What mistakes might they make? Well, the kids understood right away. They might think that's an accurate portrayal of 20th century America, 20th century world, and they would be wrong about that. They might think this is a religious document portraying the myths of our gods. They may think that this is and they might not understand the power relationships between the empire and the rebellion. They might not understand the gender relationships between Princess Leia and Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. They might not get the names. They might not know that Luke Skywalker is descendant from the Darth Vader, the Dark Father. They might not get all this stuff. What don't we get when we read the ancient prophets? There's a lot we don't know about the social circumstances of these prophets and what it is we have. All we have, like our 10,000 years from now archaeologists, all we have is the document. We don't have any more than the document and a few scraps of archaeology to guide us in what we know. So, for example, let's ask some of the basic questions. We have a book here of prophets. Were these all the prophets? Were there other prophets? How did these guys get into the book and the other guys didn't get into the book? We don't know that. We know that there are lots and lots of other guys running around ancient Israel proclaiming words of God, proclaiming words of prophecy. But how come these guys got in the Bible and those other guys didn't? Number two, what we have here are the words of prophets. But are they the words of the prophets? Are they all the words of the prophets or only selected words of the prophets? Who edited them? Who put them into the book? What were they looking at when they put them in the book? Are these all the words, or are these just the sort of greatest hits of the prophets? Here's another thing. The prophet lives. Are these all the words, or are these just the sort of greatest hits of the prophets? Here's another thing. The prophet lives in ancient Israel. Now we know a little bit from what the prophet tells us. We know that Amos says to the priest Amaziah, I'm not a prophet. I'm just a farmer from Tekoa. Well, what was he doing when he wasn't prophesying? How does that work? But here's the biggest problem. And this is the one that really vexes me. And I've asked my professors this over and over again, haven't found the answer. So I'll ask all of you. The prophet begins his prophecy with these words, Ko Amar Adonai. Thus says God. What did he mean by that? Is the prophet simply a ventriloquist dummy sitting on God's lap, mouthing the words of God? Why did God need prophets to do that if God just wanted the words proclaimed into the world? Does the prophet hear a voice? In what language does the voice speak? In what idiom does the voice speak? Does the voice, if it's a voice, how do you know it's not your own voice? It's not an internal voice of psychosis. There is, by the way, a theory that the connection between right brain and left brain, there's a biological name for this, callosium something or other, that in ancient times there were people whose connection was much stronger. And when they heard voices from heaven, what they were hearing was the other side of the brain speaking to them. And that's what they interpreted as the voice of God. Is that what it was? Or was God's voice rather not an explicit voice of words, but of vision? It wasn't that Amos heard God's words screaming about the widows and the orphans and the poor and the destitute of ancient Israel. It was rather that he opened his eyes and saw what nobody else could see. He saw the degradation of the poor. He saw the humiliation of poverty. He saw the oppression of homelessness. He saw what hunger took away from children. He saw it and he was shocked by it. And his language, Ko Amar Adonai, so says God, was actually a metaphor for his own moral outrage. Well, but if it's a metaphor for moral outrage, how do you know that it's eternal in some sense and not simply a metaphor for momentary morality? Because morality does evolve and it does change. And there are moments when things we thought were okay turn out to be immoral. And there were moments that things that we used to think are immoral are now acceptable morally. What does it mean when he says, Ko Amar Adonai? So says God. You know, the simplest way to put this is kind of crude, and I apologize, but if a guy stands on the corner of 42nd Street and 5th Avenue in Manhattan and he screams, God spoke to me, and there probably is a guy saying that, you call that guy crazy. You call 911 and you call 911 and you call for a psychiatric evaluation and you give him a shot of Haldol and he feels better. He comes back down to earth. But why is a guy saying, thus says God, now a species of insanity? But when he said it 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, it's somehow the most profound statement there is. We don't know. We don't know. We have to listen carefully to the prophets and listen carefully within as we read these books and decide for ourselves, what does this mean? Today we're going to take a look at an extraordinary prophet, in some ways very controversial. So I'm going to ask you to make sure that you're over the age of 18 and you're allowed to into an R-rated movie to hear this prophet. His name is Hosea. Hosea is a man who lives in the north of Israel. And as I pointed out last time, the north of Israel is a verdant, green, lush area that's rained, that's watered by the rainfall from on high. And the great nervousness of people who lived in the north was whether the rain would come each season. If the rain came, then we had crops. If the rain came, then we were safe. If the rain came, we would eat. If the rain came, it was bracha. It was a blessing. But if the rain didn't come, if it was drought, then there was no other place to find water, and we would starve. And so that sense of dependency, that sense of vulnerability, the risk of living in a rain-soaked area, that got into the heart of ancient Israel. And what happened was that people began to adopt some of the customs of the people who lived about us. And that specifically in Canaanite worship was the worship of Baal and Asherah. Baal is the male principle of the universe who rains his seed onto the earth. Asherah is the earth goddess, and she accepts the seed and gives us crops. That's the myth of the Baal worship. We talked about this briefly during our discussion of Elijah a couple weeks ago at Pesach. This becomes very popular in the north of Israel. And I think if you were to ask an ancient Israelite, but don't you understand that you are commanded, you'll have no other gods before me? The ancient Israelite would say, I agree. God is God. Adonai, the God of our ancestors, is our God. This is just a way of hedging our bets. I'm just making sure that the rain comes. Well, this is what Hosea is going to respond to. In particular, and here's where it gets a little dicey, a little warm here. The ancient Canaanites, as far as we know, used sexual acts as sympathetic magic to make it rain. A cultic prostitute, that is a cultic priestess, would take a farmer out into the field, and they would engage in a sexual act, in a sexual union. And then at the moment of truth, he would pour his seed out onto the field as a way of encouraging Baal to do the same from on high. Sexual things became part of worship. Now, I used to kibitz that if we brought this back, people might come to shul more often. But that's a bad kibitz. Sexual acts, sexual imagery, sex is part of life. And religion has something to say about it. It's only in certain sects of Christianity and the Gnostic traditions that Christianity came from that identify the body as evil. The body is anti-God, where you're told you have to repress the flesh in order to exalt the spirit. It's only in those sects and ideologies that sex is considered dirty, unholy, vulgar, and sex has to be repressed in order for spiritual life to take place. That's why the priest is celibate in the Catholic tradition. But in the Jewish tradition, it's a much different idea. The body is a gift of God. The body is creation of God. The body is neither good nor evil. Its impulses and urges can be used for either one. Wine can make you stinking drunk, turn you into a beast. But we use wine to make kiddush on Friday night for Shabbos. Wine becomes the symbol of our joy at a wedding or a bris. Food can make us into an animal, or food can become a feast, a seder, a Shabbos meal. Money can turn us into a beast. The pursuit of money, the spending of money, or money can be tzedakah. Money can do justice in the world. And sex? Sex can make a human being into a beast. Take away all of our sensibilities, rob us of our ethics and our compassion. Or sexuality can become kiddushin, which is the word for bonding, for marriage in Jewish life. Sexual union becomes the symbol of the union of the soul. The union of the body becomes a symbol of the union of the soul to a loving, caring couple who are responsible for one another's protection and love. And it becomes the highest expression, a mutual expression of bonding, of connection. Our bodies are bonded because our souls are bonded. And our souls are bonded, and we look for a powerful physical expression, and we find it in the bonding of bodies. So sex and religion go together, at least in Judaism they do. Here, sexuality is going to become a sort of metaphor for Hosea, because Hosea's problem is going to be the unfaithfulness of the people Israel. The unfaithfulness of the people Israel. And the algorithm, the analogy he's going to draw is that a wife and husband are unfaithful to each other. We call that adultery. Israel and God are unfaithful to each other. We call that idolatry. Idolatry is spiritual adultery. And so, let's take a look inside the text and see how this works out. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, in the reign of King Uzziah, Yotam, Achaz, and Chizkiah of Judah, and the reign of King Jeroboam, son of Joash, in Israel. So we're talking about mid-8th century, 700 BCE. In the middle of that century, the northern kingdom of Israel is powerful and prosperous. Very powerful and very prosperous. The southern kingdom of Jerusalem is kind of weak. And Hosea lives in the north, and he's talking to the people of that prosperous, powerful northern kingdom. And he first tells us a little bit of autobiography, which is going to be critical to understand this book. When the Lord first spoke to Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go get yourself a wife of whoredom, of zenut, of an unfaithful wife, a wife of whoredom, and children of whoredom, for the land will stray from following the Lord. Go marry a woman with no morals, with no self. Go marry, and I'm sorry for this, but go marry a nymphomaniac. So he went and he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. Now, the names all mean stuff. The word Hosea means to save, to rescue. Gomer, Ligmor, means to finish, which is the one thing she can't do because she's an nymphomaniac. And Diblaim means double talk, means a woman of lies. She's the daughter of lies, of untruth. She conceived and bore a son. And the Lord instructed him, name him Jezreel, for I'll punish the house of Jehu. That's the ruling kingdom in Israel. Name him Jezreel for the bloody deeds at Jezreel and put an end to the monarchy. So his first son is going to be named for the battlefield in which Israel committed their sins. It's like naming your kid Antietam or Gettysburg or something. And in that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And he conceived again and named him Lo Ruchama, which means no mercy. So the first kid's name is the battlefield. The second name's kid is no mercy. Second kid's name is no mercy. I'll no longer accept the house of Israel or pardon them. And then after weaning Lo Ruchama, she conceived and bore a son, and she named him Lo Ami, for you're not my people, and I'm not your God. All right, what happened? What happened? We got a simple-minded guy. And a simple-minded guy goes out and marries the woman of his dreams, thinking that she's everything I want. She's passionate and she's loving and she's beautiful and she's everything I want. And it turns out that she has a very serious problem. She's a sex addict. And she goes out and cheats on him. And he's the cuckolded. He's the cuckolded spouse. He's the spouse who's been cheated on. You know, your lion eyes, right? I can see your lion eyes. And every night she puts on her slinky red dress and her fancy perfume and her high-heeled shoes. And he says, where are you going, honey? And she says, oh, I'm going out to see a sick friend. And he knows where she's going because she comes back late the night and there's lipstick is smeared and there's the stink of booze and there's the obviously the signs of sexual play. And he's so conflicted. He's conflicted. But then something remarkable happens to him. He suddenly decides, or either decides, discovers, or realizes that this impossible situation to be married to a woman who humiliates you night after night, a woman who has no self-control, to be married to this woman is not a problem for him. It was sent to him as a sign of Israel's unfaithfulness to God, that he is acting out in a kind of strange psychodrama, what God is experiencing in the loss of fidelity, in the loss of loyalty, in the loss of faithfulness on the part of Israel as they go running off of these idols that are going to bring them prosperity. That he and God are living the same life. And that he was sent this experience so that he could feel the betrayal within. And feeling the betrayal within, he feels God's sense of betrayal. So here he is sitting at home with his 3 kids. One kid is named for the battlefield. One kid means I have no mercy on you. And one kid means I reject you. Wondering, where is mama? What's mama out doing tonight? And there's one other little fact that you need to know, which is that the god of the Canaanites, the masculine god, is Baal. Baal is the colloquial Hebrew word for husband or lover, because the verb form of Baal, Boel, is to have intercourse. It's a very crude word for intercourse. It's not making love. It's not bonding. It's not matrimony. It's a very crude word for sexual play, sexual attachment, sexual intercourse, copulation. And so he is her Baal, her husband, just as God is the Baal of Israel. And she cheats on him with a different Baal, just as Israel cheats on God with a different Baal. So now here comes the text, chapter 2. The number of people should be like that of the sands of the sea. But turn to the poetry. Look at verse number 4. Listen to this. Rebuke your mother, rebuke her. So here is Papa at home. Mama has gone out in her red dress with her high-heeled shoes to visit a friend who is sick, and he knows where she is. And he turns to the children and says, damn her. Rebuke your mother, rebuke her. For she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. And let her put away her harlotry from her face and her adultery from between her breasts. Else I strip her naked and leave her as the day she was born, and let her make her like a wilderness. Render her like desert land, and let her die of thirst. I will disown her children. They are now a harlot brood. In that their mother played the harlot. And she conceived them and acted shamelessly because she thought, I will go after my lovers who supply my bread and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. The husband at home, knowing his wife is cheating on him that very night, is railing at her. He's screaming at the children. He's screaming at the walls. He's screaming at his pillow. He's so angry. And all he can do is fantasize is what I'm going to do when I get my hands around her throat. He's so betrayed. But at the same time, it is not just his betrayal. It's the betrayal of God by Israel. Because they think that it was Baal and Asherah who got them their bread and their water and the fertility of the land. They don't understand that it was the God of Israel. Assuredly, this is verse 8, I will hedge up her roads with thorns and raise her walls against her. She will not find her paths, pursue her lovers as she will. She will not overtake them, and seek them as she may never find them. Then she will say, I will go and return to my first husband, for I fared better than now. I will keep her away, and her lovers will reject her, and her lovers will give up on her, and she will then realize that she needs him. She'll come home to me. She needs me. And you can see here, you can feel here how the rage has been spent, how the rage is boiled over, how the anger has flared. And once it's gone, this sort of sense of exhaustion. And all he can say is, come back and I'll love you. Come back and I'll be with you. Come back and we'll be a family again. And did she consider this, verse 10 in chapter 2? It was I who bestowed on her the new grain and wine and oil. God says, I gave you your prosperity. And the husband said, I gave you a home and I cared for you. It was I who lavished silver on her and gold, which they used for Baal. Assuredly, I'll take back my new grain in its time, my new wine in its season. I'll snatch away my wool and my linen to serve to cover her nakedness. Now I will uncover her shame in the very sight of her lovers, and none shall save her from me. I will expose her for the tramp, the whatever words we use now, for the immoral behavior. And even her lovers are going to see something ugly in her. I will uncover her shame in the sight of her lovers, and none shall save her from me. And I will end all her rejoicing, her festivals, new moons, and Sabbaths, all her festival seasons. I will lay waste to her vines and fig trees, which she think are a fee she received from her lovers. I will turn them into brushwood, and the beasts of the field shall devour them. Thus I will punish her for the days of the Baalim. So here's the husband railing against his wife, but it's also God railing against Israel. Same dynamic, you see? And the terms are just equally analogous. They're parallel. On which she offered them offerings when decked with earrings and jewels, she would go after her lovers, forgetting me. The plaintive cry of a God who has given us all, and we just never say thank you. Assuredly, I will speak to coaxingly. And now the anger is spent. And now the rage is gone. And now all he can think about is just come home. Just come home. We'll figure it out. Come home. We'll make reconciliation. Come home. I will speak coaxingly to her and lead her through the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. I'll give her vineyards from the valley of Ahor, the plowland of hope, and she will respond. And here's this fantasy. She's going to come home one day because she's going to realize how much I love her. She's going to come home one day when she realizes how much she needs me. She's going to come home one day when she realizes that I love her and she needs that kind of love. Not what they can give her, but what I can give her. And when there she will respond as in the days of her youth, when she came up from the land of Egypt. So now what Hosea does is turn the Egyptian experience, the wandering in the desert, into a nostalgic memory of fidelity. That was our honeymoon. Remember how good a honeymoon it was? Now, the Bible doesn't call it a honeymoon, but Hosea remembers it that way. And in that day, this is verse 18, you will call me Ishi, which is my mate, my husband. No more will you call me Baali. You will not go looking after the Baal. You will not think of me as another god. For I will remove the names of the Baalim from her mouth, and they shall be never more be mentioned by name. And in that day I'll make a covenant. And there's a little bit of prose here, but I want to skip that for a moment because it's interjected here. It doesn't belong here. Look at the next verse, which is 21. And I will espouse you forever, and I will espouse you in righteousness and justice. And with goodness and mercy I will espouse you in faithfulness. Then you shall be devoted to the Lord. In that day I will respond. And now he spells out all the blessings. I'll respond to the sky and respond to the earth. The earth shall respond with new grain, wine, and oil. And they shall respond to Jezreel, and I'll sow her in the land of my own and take Ruchaman back in my favor. And I will say to Lo Ami, you are my people. And he will say, you are my God. The humiliated spouse expends all of his rage, and then in an exhausted sense of nostalgia and dream-like fantasy says, come home and we'll be a family. And those words, which are so beautiful, I will espouse you forever, eristichli leolam, eristichli b'tzedek u'mishpat, I will espouse you in righteousness and justice and with goodness and with mercy. Those are words which are said when we put on tefillin in the morning. Because when you put on tefillin on your fingers, it's like putting on a wedding ring. And you're being espoused. This is a marriage between God and Israel, a marriage that took place at Mount Sinai under the chuppah of the mountain, a marriage for which the Torah was the ketubah, a marriage, and the prophet says, someday you'll come home and we'll renew those vows, and we'll be married again, and we'll start over, and we'll be a family, and I will take back the children that I rejected, and I will take her back, and we'll be together. The very strange man, this Hosea, because he's living the pain of God and the faithlessness of Israel. He identifies with the faithlessness of his own wife, and he feels, on the one hand, the rage and pain of God, who has been spurned for false gods of Baal and Asherah. But he also feels the power of God to forgive, the deep love that underlies this relationship. After all, if he didn't really love her, if he didn't really want her, he would just leave. He would just leave the relationship. He doesn't need this relationship. But underneath the reason for the humiliation, the very reason for the humiliation is that he really does love her. And he just doesn't understand why she doesn't love him and why they can't be a family. And he waits for her. And someday he dreams, someday she'll come home and she'll see that it wasn't them who gave her what she most needed in the world. It was me. We have to ask a question, though. What is idolatry? What does it really mean to worship an idol? Why is the Bible so hung up on this? Why is it such a violation of the tradition? Why is the Bible so enraged when Israel worships these idols? But for that, I think we're going to wait till next week. that is a separate topic that we'll take a look through several different examples in biblical literature, and we'll continue with our friend Hosea as he hopes, and sometimes he hopes in vain, that his people will return and that God will bring them back. Thank you for listening today. I want to wish you a very, very good week. Take very good care. Pay attention here on Valley Beth Shalom Live on Facebook Live. We have programs and opportunities to learn and grow and connect all the time. Minyan every morning at 7:30 and every evening at 6. Tonight, I welcome into the Rabbi's study for an interview the eminent scholar, Professor Jonathan Sarna of Brandeis University. Professor Sarna teaches American Jewish history and Jewish history. He's an expert in American Jewish history. And I wanted to ask him, how did the Great Depression change the Jewish world? And how did the Jewish world cope with the deprivations of the Depression? And how can we learn from that experience how to cope with the uncertainty and the issues that we're dealing with today and will certainly be dealing with in the days to come? That conversation's tonight, right here on Facebook Live at 7 o'clock. I invite you to join me in the Rabbi's study. For some reason, I can't get comments on my computer here, but if you do have comments, and send them in either as you can message me or put them as comments on this broadcast, and I'll pick them up. I'll bring them next week. I want to wish you a very good week. Take very good care. Stay safe.